Okay, welcome to this webinar on preparing for the exam. This is Alex Byrne from the Landscape Institute. Now, you've all got your microphones muted, but as I was saying just before we started, you do have the ability to annotate as we go along. So if you just want to have a go at that and try swirling around the screen, I've actually got a way of trying that out. So one of the things you've all got is an arrow, which you can use to point which segment of the pie chart in question you actually belong to. So that's something that you can all do now if you wish to. Equally, we've got, or simply scribble on it, that's fine as well. Equally, we've got these kind of tables. So in these ones, you might add your arrow in on one side and then use the T, the text tool, to then add in what the answer actually is. And we'll be using these at various points throughout the presentation. Just to say that if you are using the text tool at any time, you just need to click away from where you were typing just to make sure that it does show up on the screen. So anyway, be ready to use those as we go along. Let me just make sure, yeah, everybody should have them. Yeah, and that's going to be good. Now, as we go along as well, just bear in mind that if you have any questions, there is a chat window down here somewhere, and you can type questions into the chat window, or indeed anything else you wish to, as I have just done. And I will come back to the chat window at the end and answer any questions that have accrued in there as we've been going along. But for now, let's get going. So we've got a few objectives for this session. And just while I'm beginning, let me point out that this session is specifically for people who are on what's called the new syllabus, version 6 of the syllabus, which is the one with the 6 elements in the core and the underpinning areas. So if you're taking the exam in 2013 and you're on the old syllabus with ABC in it, then some of this isn't going to make sense to you. But there is a webinar already on YouTube which you'll be able to watch, which will make more sense. Anyway, our objectives for this session are all about the new syllabus, and they are essentially how to register for an exam, so we'll go quickly through the basics. The timeline as well, because every year a couple of people get caught out and can't take the exam when they want to. Then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes. We're going to be talking about the standard the examiners look for, what to expect on the day. We're also going to talk quite a bit about preparing for the exam through doing things like mock exams. And then we're going to finish at the end with a little section on nerves, because however confident you are, however confident you feel in advance of the exam, it's really very unusual for someone not to feel at least slightly nervous when they walk into the exam. And that's not because we want you to feel nervous, it's just a natural reaction to a test situation. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to handle nerves at the end. So I've already said we're talking about version 6 of the syllabus, which has got elements 1 to 6 in it. So you're welcome to stay if you're still on the old syllabus, but that's just what we'll be talking about in this webinar. So the pathway life cycle, I'm assuming that most of you are pretty familiar with it. The candidate registers, I'm assuming you've all done that. And then, of course, there's the initial review. And it's at that point that all the candidate's past experience is taken into account. We've then got the candidate developing and recording, submitting a development pack. The mentor submits a mentor review, the supervisor submits feedback, and you essentially go round and round this circle. Now, at some point, the candidate will be at a point where they're ready to take the exam. And this is where the mentor actually submits a mentor review. And we're going to have a little look at what that looks like in just a moment. In fact, let's do that now. So the mentor review, hopefully you've all had a mentor review submitted, or at least an initial review. And the mentor review is basically like the initial review. The mentor review has a question at the end of it, which is this one, and it always has this at the end of every mentor review until this question has been answered. And so the mentor is always prompted to consider whether the candidate is ready to take the exam. And where it says the next relevant session, that means in the next possible exam. So, you know, if you're at this point in the year, we're talking about May, because that would be the next possible exam. Now, usually the mentor will answer no, because the candidate isn't ready until they are ready, obviously. But at some point, they're going to answer yes. And as soon as they do that, they'll have some additional questions pop up. Let's just get rid of my little scribbles there. So there are then these additional 4 questions that pop up which the mentor is asked to answer. And you'll see these once a mentor has submitted a mentor review with a notification in it, you'll be able to go in and look at these. But it might mean that during a mentor meeting where you're discussing whether you're ready to take the exam or not, your mentor might want you to think about areas where you've had particular experience, where you haven't had particular experience, and also, you know, this might be something that hasn't come up that much in the past, want to talk about your integrity, professional values and responsibilities, and your preparedness to actually become chartered. Okay, so that's the additional parts of the mentor review that come up. Now we get back to the pathway life cycle. So the mentor submits the mentor review with the notification in it, at which point the supervisor does their feedback. And the supervisor has 2 options. They can either decline the mentor review, at which point you continue going back around the circle, or they can accept it, at which point you can then register for the exam. So I've got all that summarised in this snazzy little table. So we go through from submitting the notification to approving or declining it. Now, assuming it is approved, and this will be done within the usual supervisor feedback timescale, you then get a link, well, you get an email and a link on your dashboard saying that you can now register for the exam. That will then take you through to a little form where it's very simple. You simply put in the dates that you prefer, and there's generally a choice between Manchester or London, and also whether you have any special requirements. So, for instance, whether you have a medical condition or any other kind of condition that might mean that you would need extra time or a special arrangement for the exam. And we're very open to any issues that anyone might have. Then we will adapt the exam as required. So you've then got a certain amount of time, usually about a month and a half, before the exam registration deadline happens. Once that deadline has passed, you can't register the exam after that, or you can, but only for the next round of exams. But once that has passed, at that point I jump into action and ask the examiners, I send them all a list of all the candidates who will be taking the exam in that particular session, and ask all the examiners who have volunteered whether there are any candidates that they can't examine. And there'll usually be sort of half a dozen for each one, people they've worked with in the past, or companies they're currently working for or bidding against, or have had some relationship in the past. Sometimes people are related or even married. So we gather all those conflicts of interest, and using those, we go ahead and create the timetable. And it's this point that we're at the moment with these exams, because I've just done the timetables today and released them to the candidates. After that, of course, the exams take place. And as I said, there'll normally be at least 1 day in Manchester and 1 day in London, sometimes more than 1 day in London. And then about 2 weeks after the final day of exams, the results will be released. So that's 3rd of December this year for the November exams. And will actually be, I can tell you, the 3rd of June for the May exams. So that's already been timetabled. So that's the exam process. Now, I mentioned how there were deadlines to do with this, and these are the really important ones. So for you guys, I'm assuming you're not in the November exam. The really important deadline, if you want to go for the May exam, is this one. Your mentor must submit a notification as part of their mentor review for Q4. Now, they can submit it before that. That's not a problem at all. They can submit it in the mentor review that's due on the 7th of October for Q3. But the last chance they have to nominate you for the May exam is 7th of January. And remember that mentor reviews can't be late unless there are grounds for extension, which are only bereavement, serious illness, or act of God. So just bear those in mind to make sure your mentor is ready to submit. The candidate has then, assuming it's approved, of course, by the supervisor, then got an additional almost 2 months until the end of February to actually register and pay for the exam. And similar thing for the November exam. The deadline for the mentor review in that case is the 7th of July. And then you've got until the end of August to actually register and pay. Now, never forget, all these deadlines are in the back of the guidebook. If you just want a quick reference guide, they're also in the middle of the guidebook in the relevant sections, but they're also specifically in the back in the appendix. Now, the criteria for notification are in the guidebook and have changed quite extensively, well, moderately at least, since the syllabus was updated, because the stage definitions have also been updated. Now, we're not going to go through the stage definitions in this particular webinar, but I would encourage you to look at the Introduction to Pathway 2.0 webinar on YouTube. And you can follow the link that's actually on the dashboards in the alerts section at the moment to find that, which does go through what the stage definitions are. And it's very important that you and your mentor have reviewed what they are, so that you will then be able to pass the exam in May or whenever it is you want to take it. So the motivation criteria, the important thing here, because it's still, let's go back actually, it's still a minimum of stage 2 across the majority of the syllabus. Okay, so that's what it was in the old syllabus. Oh, yep, someone's pointing that out, it's absolutely correct. Stage 1 may have been achieved in a small number of areas, but no areas will be at stage 0. Okay, so these 3 elements here are exactly the same as they were on the old syllabus. And what it used to say on the old syllabus was that you might have some 3s. What it says on the new syllabus is that stage 3 will have been achieved. Okay, so we've essentially here got that candidates must have stage 3 in areas relating to the candidate's specific areas of expertise. Okay, and this is going to depend entirely on your experience profile. It's not going to be the same from candidate to candidate. So when the syllabus was updated, it was deliberately made a lot more flexible. So it was no longer the idea that one knowledge profile fitted everyone. Now we're going to see some variation in the areas where a candidate has their specialist knowledge, and that's going to make them stand out from other candidates who will have other areas of specialism. Essentially, all candidates must have some stage 3s in their mentor reviews. So let's just move ahead. Now, has anybody actually thought about which exam they would like to be aiming for? You can use your arrows, as Nicola, straight away. Personally, I'm not sure. Not being a landscape architect, I can't be sure I'll ever actually get to become a chartered person in any profession, indeed. But there you go, such is life. Okay, so there's a number of you going for May next year, and yeah, a couple of you thinking about November. Well, whenever you're going for, the format of the exam has been the same for many years now, but it's always good to have a goal in mind, just so because it helps you with your preparation. And what I always say in all these webinars is it's never too early to be thinking in terms of the exam, because the exam is the final test, and it's not like when you're learning to drive, the driving instructor doesn't start saying, okay, yeah, that's good enough. In your first lesson, he's saying to you, or mine was saying to me, from the first lesson, okay, you need to be looking in the mirror, you need to be checking, and you need to have your arms at 10 to 2 or whatever it is on the steering wheel. So they've consistently got the end goal in sight of actually passing that driving test, even though you probably won't drive like that for the rest of your life. Well, chartership, exactly the same. Always have the end goal in mind, although of course you will be using this knowledge during the rest of your life, although it's quite possible you'll never have to explain it to someone from first principles in a small meeting room. But there we go. So yeah, always have an end goal in sight if you can, but don't worry if you're right at the beginning of the pathway. But it seems like most of you who are here today have got an idea of when you're going to be taking the exam. Now, I definitely say to those people who are looking at May, it's, you want to be getting into a study group. If you're not in one already, then you want to be getting into one, because you want to be thinking about orally answering questions and getting used to talking about your experience. For those of you who are thinking about November, still a year away, well, it's never too soon to join a study group, although other study group members might think so if they feel they're at a different point to you. But you can always look for one on Talking Landscape and just say that you're aiming for the exam in a year's time. But anyway, I'll come on to study groups a little bit later. So let's talk about the format of the exam. Well, the Institute doesn't tend to have the exams here at Charles Darwin House, although actually we will be next May. So when what we tend to do is use kind of professional venues. So these would be hotels or meeting suites. So you can expect to see the kind of meeting room that you might be in for a client meeting or a training session. And it'll generally have a table with a few chairs around it, and maybe a window. But there'll always be paper and water and glasses on the table for you to use if you need to. So that's the kind of environment you can expect. There will also be at least 2 examiners in the room. Actually, not at least 2, there will be 2 examiners in the room. And there may well also be a monitor. Now, the monitor is not there to examine you. The monitor is there to observe the examiners. And this is one of the quality assurance methods we use, just to ensure that everybody has the same standard and everyone gets the same treatment within the exam, of course, allowing for variations in personality and so on. So there'll be possibly 3 people in the room with you. And the monitor's usually off to one side, but there'll be you and the 2 examiners on the other side of the table. Also, it tends to be about 45 minutes. Excuse me, I must just take a drink for a moment. Sorry about that. So the exam will be about 45 minutes. There's up to an hour allowed for it. So if you need that bit of extra time, it's yours. But usually 45 minutes. Now, someone who answers every question perfectly, who is the epitome of succinctness in their answers and who has everything they need on the tip of their tongue, they may well finish the exam in 30 minutes. Someone who's talking a lot and can't remember the word that they're looking for may well take 60 minutes. It's, entirely depends on the person. Oh, I'm going to have another cough. Excuse me a moment. It is notoriously impossible to get through something like this without developing some form of bronchitis. But anyway, so this is the basic format of the exam, the meeting room, the 3 people plus you, and the timing. Now, you will be astonished at how quickly the exam actually goes. The 45 minutes will fly past. So that's why it's always a good idea to be thinking about the not registration, I'm the one that hasn't got the words on the tip of my tongue, the final assessment, that's the word I was looking for. And there's a way of doing this. This is something that a colleague is very fond of saying to me, although he often adds additional P's, that perfect preparation prevents poor performance. And of course, it doesn't have to be perfect, but certainly preparation prevents poor performance. And that is why we would always encourage everyone to practice answering questions orally, not just, kind of writing notes or casually chatting to a colleague about it. And there's something that I just want to try, which might show you the importance of this. Now, we're going to be using the text tool. So if you can find the T on your toolbars and become ready to type, what you need to do is you need to put your arrow on one of these lines and just claim that line as yours. And move mine over here so that someone else can use that space. And then you're going to use your text tool. And John Paul, I'm just going to borrow your line here. You're just going to begin typing on your line. And then remember that the text won't show up until you've actually clicked away from it. So let me just get rid of my box of text. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of dictation. So fingers at the ready and type as quickly as you can and then click away from your typing when you're finished. Are we ready? Right, here we go. Start. I honestly believe that I can type faster than I can talk. Full stop. End of thing. Okay, Greg, that was actually quite impressive. John Paul, I'm quite impressed. Yeah, it's all coming up here. Now, the thing is that you can't type faster than you can talk, typos or not. And equally, you can't write as fast or anywhere near as fast as you can talk, which is why there are journalists and so on have this amazing shorthand, which no one else can seem to read. Typing, oral writing, is actually a very slow way of getting the information out of your brain. You can actually speak very quickly, and that's why we quite often use ums and ahs, because we haven't got the words as fast as our brain wants them. But it means that if you're writing out answers to questions or writing down what you know about, bat surveys, for example, or, typing in an email notes to do with something or other, it's all going into your mind, but you still haven't got the information prepared for recall as quickly as you're going to need it in the exam. So you're going to need to be very used to talking about your knowledge, not just revising your knowledge as you would have done, when you were at university, because those were written exams. So oral communication is absolutely key in all of these revision, whenever you're preparing for the exam, whenever you're revising, even, in conversations with your mentor, it's really important that you're answering questions fully, not just in a kind of office shorthand. Because it's all very well to say, oh, that project we were working on last week where I did that assessment. And, your mentor's going, oh, yeah, I know the one for that garden. And you're going, yeah, well, that's basically the answer to the question. That tells your mentor what the answer to the question is. But if you were to use that kind of referencing with your examiner, they're not going to know what you're talking about. They're not always going to accept acronyms either. They'll probably be all right with LVIA, but they may well want to know what other acronyms actually mean. Just make sure that you're aware of them. For example, do we all know what BIM stands for? It's one of those things that can confuse people sometimes, not that that is particularly in the syllabus, but so the examiners are going to want you to be precise. They're not going to know what or thingy is, and they're looking for you to be able to answer questions quite lucidly, so quite smoothly. They're going to want relevant information. There's a particular, well, we'll come back to that later, but there's a particular question answer type that the examiners have nicknamed, which we'll come back to later, but they want relevant information. And most of all, they want succinct answers. Now, this isn't to say that you have to answer in a single sentence or even in a single word. You can talk as much as you need to get the information across, but you've only got 45 minutes plus or minus. So you've not got time to talk in great detail about all the different aspects of a particular project you're asked about. You've got to make sure your answers are targeted. And also, where possible, you'll be relating your answers to relevant work scenarios. Now, you don't have to kind of bend over backwards to do this. If you're answering a question where you don't have any personal experience and your knowledge is theoretical, then don't worry about it. That's accepted, and the examiners will know that in any case from having read your development packs. But where you can, always relate your answers back to your own work, because equally the examiners will know what you've done in the past. Now, I was talking about answers that the examiners aren't fond of, and I'll come to the one I was thinking of in a moment. But there are several answers which have been said in exams, and the examiners have a debrief at the end of the day with the chief examiner, and they always talk about, particularly good candidates and good examples, best practice, people, who are outstanding. They'll talk about the weaker candidates and why people failed, but they will also bring up examples, particularly potent examples, of things they heard that surprised them. And so all of these are answers that have been given during an exam. One of the answers they don't like is when you say, well, this is a complete guess, but, because that clearly shows that you don't know what the answer is. You are guessing. Guessing is not a good idea. It's like a game show where it's a university challenge, of course, where if you get the answer wrong, you lose points. Now, I'm not saying that happens in the exam, but giving out the wrong information confidently, or giving out the wrong information and making the examiners aware that you think you're giving out the wrong information, are definitely bad things. The examiners don't want you to be in a meeting with clients in 6 months' time and to confidently advise them that something's correct, when in fact, a month afterwards you're going to have to be ringing up your PII guy to explain why you're being sued. So definitely don't start an answer with "this is a complete guess." Equally, don't just say "I don't know," because "I don't know" means a 0 stage score against the syllabus area, which is of course a fail. So it's perfectly acceptable that you might not know everything about a particular topic, but remember that you have to have a stage 1 level of knowledge across all syllabus areas as an absolute minimum, and a stage 2 across the majority of them. But rather than saying "I don't know," what you might say instead is, "Well, I haven't had any experience with that, but I have a colleague who, knows about badges and could advise me on that," or, I have a good relationship with an LVIA consultant who would help me work out what the process was, or, that kind of thing. So never just a blunt "I don't know." Equally, it's best not to say something along the lines of "the book says," especially if the book you're referring to happens to be the professional practice book by Tennant Gomery, which is now some years out of date. It's much better for you not to imply that you're just spouting what someone else has told you. It's much better for you to have the confidence to say, "I know that, this is the case," or, the best practice is to ... not, I've read in a book. And this is related to the final example I've got, which is, "I was told that this is correct, but I don't think it is." This is a terrible, really passive answer to give. It's the kind of answer that you might get from someone at school or possibly university, where they're in the mindset where someone is going to come along and tell them information, and they're then going to memorize it and write it down and then regurgitate it later on. As professional landscape architects, you are independent, dynamic, motivated individuals, and you're going to go and research information for yourself. And you're going to be doing CPD in the future because you know that it's necessary, not just because someone happened to come along and tell you that something has changed. So if you indicate that you don't think something is right, then the examiners are going to assume that you don't know, the correct answer, even if it happens to be correct. Then, it's just not going to come across very well at all. Now, the answer type that I was thinking of earlier is what the examiners have nicknamed a portfolio answer. And this is where the examiners will ask a question, and the candidate, rather than answering the question itself, will then suddenly come out with a huge splurge of knowledge that relates to the topic of the question. So let's say there's a question asked about I don't know, off the top of my head, as a non-landscape architect, wind turbines, some aspect of wind turbines and LVIA, and you then deliver all the information you have about LVIA, hoping that some part of that answer that you're giving will relate to the question. Now, again, that's the kind of thing which might have worked at school, where the teacher would have carefully gone through and picked out the relevant bit and crossed out the rest, but it's not going to cut it in the exam, and it certainly wouldn't do any good in a client meeting because you'd have a really confused client by that point. So avoid portfolio answers, be specific. If you're not sure what the examiner is asking, and therefore might be prompted to give a lot of information, ask the examiner a question themselves just to clarify what they mean by that question, or ask them to rephrase the question so that you can better understand what it is they're actually talking about. So oral communication is absolutely key. And in the exam, the examiners are looking for you to be confident. And that's not necessarily actual confidence as opposed to nervousness, but at least to have confidence in your knowledge. So, not to be hesitant and say that you guess, or you're not sure, or you think it's something or other, just to give a confident answer. They're also looking to you to speak clearly where possible, and to avoid the kind of bad answers. that I've just been talking about. Equally, if you don't know, then we've discussed, how you might go and how you might tell them that you don't know personally, but you know what you would do to find out. Don't tell them, if you don't understand the question and might, give a portfolio answer or simply don't understand the question, then it's not a problem to ask the examiner to rephrase. They're not going to mind. It's, no problem for them. And then, hopefully you will understand if they put the question a different way. Equally, if you're answering a question and you haven't, the words aren't on the tip of your tongue at the time that you're answering, you can always come back to something later. You'll have a pen and paper in the room with you. Just jot down what the question was and come back to it at the end. Or if you, halfway through the exam and you suddenly think, oh, I didn't mention, BAT surveys, then, you can just give your answer to that current question, and then at the end just say, and by the way, I've just thought of something relating to what you asked me before, and then you can give the information then. Okay. Now, one way of practicing talking about your knowledge with people who aren't familiar with your work, which is after all exactly what the exams actually are, is to join a study group. And in fact, before we get into this, let's just have another little pie question. Are you a member of a study group? Jane, straight in there. Excellent. Steve, Sarah. John Paul's been meaning to join one, as has Joe, and Greg is kind of on the cusp, maybe. I don't know. Hopefully, no one is going to click on green elements of not going to join one, because even if you are just joining a kind of online study group where people meet via Skype or Google Hangout, something like that, they are so useful, especially if you can join one with people that you don't work with, or where there are at least some people there that you don't work with. Because not only will you benefit from being able to practice talking about your work, you'll also benefit from being able to discuss how their office functions. Very useful if, say it's got, the study group has people in local authority and also people in private practice. You'll also be able to benefit from them talking about their projects. So it will almost be like doing mini case studies with them. If you don't get a lot of experience of contracts or planning or it used to be on the old syllabus, the ones that people had trouble with things like minerals and mining. So if you didn't get a lot of experience in those kind of areas, where they translate onto the new syllabus, then you can often pick that up from someone else in a study group. So all of you guys who have been meaning to join one for ages, let's go back to the previous slide. So there is this group, this page rather, the resources page. And here we've got a Google list of study groups. We've also got a document which is a guide to starting a study group. And then equally, if you're a member of a study group that isn't on this list, you can add it using the Google form that's all on there. So this list of study groups is added to fairly regularly by people. And this all goes back to what the chief examiners have said in the past about study groups. And this feedback is from 2 years ago now. But the reason I'm quoting this is because every bit of chief examiner feedback since then has quoted this as well. So it's just best to go back to the original. But there really is a strong correlation between study group attendance and successful exam performance. So it's absolutely, definitely useful. However, much of a drag it might be to turn up, especially in the cold winter months, especially if it's not in a local pub or something you have to travel. But it really is so useful to go along. You should definitely make the time to do that. Okay, so I think I've emphasized that one enough. If you are having any trouble finding a study group, try that list on the LI website that I was just talking about earlier. Do talk to your colleagues as well, just see whether they're aware of any. They've probably all got contacts that work outside the company that they were at university with or something. So you can find out about someone from there. Equally, it's possible that rather than having an external study group, people might just be willing to chat to you casually on a one-to-one basis, either during a lunch hour or perhaps after work one day, so that you can talk through the projects that they're working on and try not to use any of those office abbreviations for things. Lastly, look on Talking Landscape, because there are new groups. There's always people putting up messages saying that they'd like to starter group on Talking Landscape. So do look on there and just see if there's anything going on in an area that would suit you, or equally if there's a online study group that you could join. So I've talked about study groups and the importance of oral communication, because the other thing that's really useful when it comes to preparing for an exam are mock exams. Now, I'm not expecting that most of you will have done many mock exams, because you're still, at least more than 6 months off your actual exam. But I did want to share an idea with you about how you can really set these up and how you can get the most of them. Because let's face it, a mock exam, you want, say, about an hour with a chartered landscape architect who's also had time to prepare some questions in advance. So you're asking for a couple of hours of another landscape architect's work. Time. So, it is a bit of a commitment. Now, ideally, you'll have more than one with your own mentor. But what's really useful is if you can have them with someone who isn't your mentor, and if possible, also isn't that familiar with your day-to-day work, is from another company. So what I suggest to people is that through their study group, if they're a member of one, or just through local contacts if they're not, you find someone else who's aiming to take the exam, and that you essentially swap places. So one of you who was, the guy in red who was with the lady mentor is now being mock examined by the male mentor, and the guy in white is now being mock examined by the lady mentor. So you get this different perspective, and it means that you get at least 2 mock exams, one with your own mentor and one with someone else's, and it also means that you get 2 lots of feedback on your performance. So when you actually come to setting up a mock exam, there's quite a lot you can do to make it feel a bit more realistic. And I'll just pause again while I cough. As I was saying, there's quite a lot you can do to make it feel more realistic. First of all, you know that it'll be in a small meeting room, and there'll be tables and chairs, and it'll be you and potentially 2 examiners across the room from you. So you can make that scenario feel more real. I know there's some of the examiners do mock exams with their companies, and they actually make the candidate wait outside, and then they come and get them at the appropriate time. And so it really does feel very genuine, the mock experience. But anyway, so for a mock exam, the least you need is a private room where you're not going to be disturbed. People know that even if it's an important phone call, they can't come and get you. You haven't got phones going off and things like that. The other thing that you can do is make sure you run to time. Now, I've said that a normal exam would be about 45 minutes, so have a little buzzer go off, or something on your phone go off after 45 minutes, just so that you realise how quickly it went. Now, you might actually want the mock exam to extend to a whole hour, just so that you've got the benefit of a bit more time answering questions. But, it's useful just to be aware that it should only be 45 minutes. And as I say, you'll be astonished how quickly that goes. Now, this is harder to do, but in the exam itself, there will, of course, be the 2 examiners. So if you can arrange for 2 people to examine you in your mock exam, then, of course, that makes it a bit more realistic. And what you'll also realise is that it's quite easy to build up a certain amount of rapport with a single person when you're talking to them one-to-one for half an hour or more. But it's much harder to do that if there's 2 people there, and you will feel under that little bit extra pressure, which is much more like the actual exam. Now, of course, this can be difficult because you're at this point asking 2 people to give a couple of hours of their time. But if you've buddied up with someone else from your study group, maybe both of your mentors could give you a little mock exam, even if it was just a half-hour mini mock exam, then that might be useful as one of your mocks. Then finally, you want the person to have come up with some genuine questions. Now, I'm going to go into questioning techniques in a moment, but essentially, you want them to have copies of your most recent development packs so that they know what you've been working on, because that's the information that the examiners will have. and that they will be drawing their questions from as well. So you want them to have that in advance. You may want to suggest some question topics. Of course, that makes it a little bit easier because you won't have that luxury with the actual examiners, but equally it might make it a bit easier for the person who's carrying out the mock exam. Now, as you all know, there's no recording of the actual exam, whether it's a visual recording or just an oral recording. Any person found recording the exam would be then subject to disciplinary procedures and potentially lose the chance to become chartered ever. And I know that there have been recordings of the exam in the past and that they didn't get very far past the person's quite quick heartbeat. I can only imagine how it added to their stress, knowing that they could be discovered at any moment. But there's no reason why in a mock exam you shouldn't record your exam. Most cameras, certainly smartphones, have a camera on them, and they're also usually light enough to just blue tack to a wall near you so that you're recording, you know, what's going on in the room. And it's just, you know, a handy thing to have. And it means that while you're thinking about how much time is going past, the answers that you're giving, the questions you're being asked, it means that you can then go back and review what was done later on. It also means that if you're feeling brave, you can share that recording with other members of your study group or other people in the organisation that are going to be examining. And you can get additional feedback, and they can also benefit from your mock exam experience. So you're kind of sharing them around. But again, it's going to depend on how comfortable you are with that idea. Now, I said I'd talk a bit about questions. Essentially, all the questions that you're going to be asked are already in your development packs. So they're certainly all answered in your development packs, but all the question types are going to come from there, and the types of questions that the examiners will use are all in the Pathway Toolkit, which is an additional document in the resources section, which has different types of questions in it. Okay, over, I think, about 4 different pages. So there are essentially 2 types of question. There are closed questions and open questions. We'll look at closed questions first. And these are the ones where essentially you can only really give a yes or a no answer. Okay, now examiners will generally avoid these questions, and I'll show you why. And it's really because by asking a closed question, you're getting very little information from the candidate. So, you know, yes, working with that client was a success. It was such a success that you never saw them again. You know, they never came back to you. So was it really a success? Who knows? But the times when an examiner will use the question, a closed question, are if you are talking way too much and taking too long to get to the point. This is quite easy to do if you're nervous. The examiner will often just interrupt with a closed question just to shut the subject down. And equally, they will also use closed questions if you're very nervous, because it's quite reassuring at the start of an exam just to be able to answer some easy questions. Okay, so don't be surprised if the examiners do occasionally use this type of question. However, the ones that they much prefer are the open questions, and those are the ones where it's very difficult to just answer yes or no unless you're a teenager. You're much more likely to answer with a whole paragraph of information. So, for example, you know, what do you think might be a few basic ground rules? When did you prepare your first planning application? Oh, I keep thinking this is a good question, and I remember that you could just reply Tuesday. So possibly that's not the best question. But, you know, tell me what you learned from that experience. And the examiners do particularly like questions that begin with tell me, because it does just invite you to share the knowledge, the information, the experience that you have in that particular area. So whenever you hear a question that starts tell me, that should be an immediately thumbs up inside your mind, because that's a real chance for you to show off how much you know about this particular topic. Now, after you've had mock exams that have included these types of questions, it's really important, ask the examiner for feedback, but more important is really for you to reflect on how the exam went, the kinds of answers that you gave, how much information those answers contained compared to how long you were talking for, whether they actually answered the question itself. Okay, so reflection, as when writing your development logs, is really the key thing to do after a mock exam. And it's almost more important than the experience of doing the exam itself. Now, incidentally, there is a webinar up on YouTube called Reflecting on Your Development, which is only about 20 minutes long, so very easy to watch. And there's a lot in there about reflecting, not just in terms of development log, but just reflecting on any experience you have in order to get the most out of it. Now, I said that we'd finish on nerves, which we're going to do. Will just be another few minutes. And any arachnophobes may wish to look right now. There are many things that make people nervous, and it can be anything from, creepy crawlies to something like heights, even just looking out the window. But however standfast you are and however strong of nerve you are, it's perfectly normal to get at least butterflies in your stomach, if not a lot worse, when you're faced with an oral exam. And during the pathway exams, I've been running them now for almost 6 years, and I've seen every possible type of manifestation of nerves, at least I think I have. It's very common for people to be shaky, to be quite sweaty, and to be drinking water or to be quite pale. I've seen someone faint. I've seen people laughing quite hysterically. We've had someone getting up and pretty much dancing in agitation in the exam room. We've had someone who drank 2 litres of water during half an hour. So, all of these things happen. Perfectly normal, as I say. And it's often quite useful to know that it is so normal. And the reason that we get nervous is purely tied into the instinctual, evolutionary instinct of fight or flight. Okay, anytime you're under pressure, it's perfectly normal for the heart to start racing. You start breathing faster to ensure that you're full of oxygen. Your muscles tense, ready for you to run or fight. Your body starts feeling the impulse to empty itself so that you're able to do both most effectively. It's all perfectly natural. And everyone in that waiting room with you is going to be feeling some element of that. Now, the really good news is that the examiners want you to be relaxed, because a relaxed candidate is a happy candidate. It's much easier to have a two-way dialogue with them rather than just be kind of question and answer. It's much more comfortable for the examiners not to have someone sweating and dancing in front of them. And it's generally just much better for everybody. The examiners want you to pass. They absolutely want you to pass. So they will try and help you to pass where possible by relaxing you, by just kind of reassuring you and generally helping you get across the knowledge that you have. Now, if you are someone that gets very nervous, then it's often useful to visualize and imagine the scenario, and that's why I've been talking today about the format of the exams and the meeting room and the number of people in the room, the glass of water, the paper, and so on. And you can visualize this. You can visualize yourself walking into the room, taking a deep breath, sitting down, and then, giving excellent answers and generally feeling relaxed and happy. And it is astonishing how much just imagining this kind of thing, daydreaming about it, will help to reassure you. All this kind of positive daydreaming is very relaxing and soothing for your brain. So just a few final comments before we wrap up. On the actual day of the exam, and this is a while off for some of you, but possibly closer for others, there is no actual dress code, but it's best not to turn up in a onesie and a baseball cap. It's just that you dress appropriately. So you want to be seen as a safe pair of hands is a phrase that gets used quite a lot. You want to be seen as a calm, professional landscape architect. You don't have to wear a suit and tie. There's no reason why you should. Smart casual, or casual office, or smart office. I don't know. It depends on your work dress code, really. There's no need to wear a suit and heels, especially the gentlemen. But whatever you feel comfortable in. If it gives you extra confidence to wear a suit, then you go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of the examiners will inevitably be wearing jeans, but they probably won't have any holes in. On the day as well, just be on time. Best to arrive sort of 10 to 15 minutes in advance of the exam. There is a waiting room, and there will be between 5 and 8 candidates having their exam at the same time as you. So just don't be surprised when there's others in the waiting room. There'll always also be someone like myself ready to sign you in and have a look at your photo ID. Yep, as I've said, go to the waiting room. It will be signposted, or they'll know where it is at reception. And then lastly, just sign in. And once you've signed in, shown your photo ID, you're then free just to sit down, have a glass of water, have a last minute look at your notes, maybe if you want to. Some people feel comfortable doing that. Some people just want to find a quiet corner and sit there. Other people want to chat, and you're always welcome to have a conversation with the others that are in the waiting room. So that's everything I wanted to cover, and we've actually talked about quite a lot in a short space of time, so we've rattled through it. We've talked about what you need to do before you can take the exam, with the notification and so on, and also the timeline as well, which is really important. Never forget that, and make sure your mentor is aware of it as well. We've talked about the standard the examiners look for. The notification standard of majority level 2s and some stage 3s, where in the areas that you're working in, is exactly the same as the standard the examiners are looking for in the exam. So that's what they need you to prove. We've talked about the format of the exam, with the room and the glass of water and walking in with the examiners and so on. And we've also talked about the importance of oral communication. Really cannot stress that one too much, because it is so important to get used to talking about your work and about the technical side of your work with people who are not familiar with your work. So sometimes even just asking your partner, or even your child or your mother or something, to ask you questions, even if they don't understand the answer. I used to do this in my French GCSE oral test many decades ago now. Doesn't matter that they don't understand the answer, because you understand the answer, and you're going to have an idea of whether you're giving a good answer or not, and that will tell you where you still need to do a bit more preparation. We've been through what to expect on the day as well, in terms of what to wear, go to the waiting room, sign in, and we've also talked about the importance of mock exams. And then lastly, of course, the spider or the heights, we've been talking about handling nerves. So that's everything I wanted to cover. However, there is now an opportunity for you to ask questions. Now, I've got a couple here in the chat window. And you can also add any questions you wish to onto the sheet you can see in front of you. So I've got one question. What would be the best study group for graduate students who are not yet working? Okay, well, essentially the best study group is always the one closest to you, because then you're more likely to go. There aren't really specific study groups. Well, hang on, let me say that again. There aren't specific study groups for graduate students who aren't yet working, but there are study groups where people are aiming for different exams. So, for example, I think quite often there's a Royal Festival Hall group, and I know in the past they've split into people that were aiming for a May exam, and then people were aiming for a November exam, just because they're at different stages on the pathway. So you want to look for a study group where the people, first of all, are happy to have another member come along, and second of all, where they're working towards things on the same sort of timescale that you are. So I hope that answers your question. Then I've got another question, which is more of a suggestion, I think, about including a reminder in the next pathway newsletter. Asking people to register and log their study groups on the LI list. Yes, certainly that is something I do sort of periodically, but I'll certainly put one in the next newsletter. That's absolutely fine. So there's a question just come up. I've always struggled to be able to fit in a study group when you have very long working hours. Yes, I agree, absolutely. Ultimately, though, is it harder to fit in having to keep logging your records on the pathway system when you might have passed at the first attempt, had you had more experience of orally communicating? I mean, I know that it is so difficult to fit this stuff in, but it is worthwhile when you finally become chartered and you can then, you know, apart from any other benefits it brings, you can then stop having to make submissions. So think about how many hours you spend making a submission each quarter, and then try and turn those hours into study group hours, knowing that you're borrowing from the future when you won't have to be logging those records. But I do know it's difficult. I would, in that case, try maybe and consider an online study group where you're meeting maybe something like Google+, and it might be something you need to organise yourself, actually go on Talking Landscape and suggest to people. You know, that's for people who are either working in very isolated places, like we've got a couple of candidates, or no, one candidate on the Isle of Man, who obviously can't then get to another study group with other people. But we've also got candidates out in the Far East and so on who tend to be quite spaced out. Geographically, of course, so they may well want to meet up online and discuss things via effectively a video conference. Okay, those are the only questions I've had, and we're coming up to 5 o'clock, so I shall call a halt there. If anyone does have any more questions, either from this group or just when you're listening to it later, then do email those to pathway@landscapeinstitute.org. It's just had a couple more questions pop up. Will the examiners be provided with your CV uploaded to the system? Yes, the CVs that are on the system, those are the ones that the examiners will see. And in fact, I've got on my to-do list to send out an email to candidates tomorrow to remind them to upload those CVs. So I will be, those are the candidates for the November exams, of course. But yes, you need to keep your CV up to date, which is why you're actually prompted to update it each time you make a submission on the pathway to chartership. And then last question, don't remember seeing any online study groups on the list. Do I know if there are any at the moment? I know that there's a kind of standing invitation on one of the pathway groups. I think it's the Pathway Candidates group on Talking Landscape for people who are in the Far East to connect. I'm not aware of any in the UK at the moment. However, posting on Talking Landscape will often get you a couple of replies from people who would really like to do that. And it's always the kind of thing that I can highlight when I'm doing a newsletter and pointing out that there's the register for study groups on there. So I'll include that as a mention in there. Okay, that's it. That's everything. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part and being so interactive. It makes it very exciting for me, not knowing quite what's going to happen. This webinar will go up on YouTube at some point in the next few days. And again, just remember, if you have any questions, do email them to me. Thank you very much.